Hey there, friends. Welcome to True North. Lydia Cruz hanging out with you today, and a pretty fun weekend at T-Mobile Park, right? The Electric Factory is alive and in business in Seattle. It was awesome to see the Mariners end that homestand, 7-2 homestand with a walk-off win on Sunday, and a big moment for Jesse Winker. I think he's earned it at this time. As we record this, the Mariners are currently in first place in the AL West. Feels pretty good to say that. Also, Ty France, professional rake artist, named AL Player of the Week. Much deserved honor for the number 2 hitter. All in all, a pretty great start to the week. And as the Mariners head out on their latest road trip and a series against the Tampa Bay Rays, who better to talk to than my friend Corey Brock of The Athletic? How you doing, Corey?
Hey, I'm doing well, Lydia. How about you?
I'm doing excellent, especially after this last Mariners homestand. I mean, 7-2. That leaves you with a pretty good feeling, right?
Yeah, and honestly, it could have been 8-1 pretty easily if they hadn't kicked the ball around that one night against the Rangers. But yeah, still 7-2. Team's off to a good start, and they're doing the one thing that I really had concerns about, and that's hitting the ball. And they did a lot of it at home. And so we'll see how that plays out moving forward. But yeah, I think a really nice start for the team.
Yeah, who would have thought? Offense, it's really helpful. It's good when you do offense.
Yeah, I guess scoring runs is actually a good thing, apparently.
Do you feel like those offensive woes they had to start the season are sort of banished at this point? Or do you still is this how they performed in the homestand offensively sustainable?
Well, I always thought coming out of spring training that they were maybe still a bat short. The lineup was maybe one bat light. And I don't know if I've really moved off that at all. They certainly ran into a really good stretch against, I think, 2 teams that aren't going to be very good this year, the Rangers and the Royals. Did take 2 of 3 from the Astros, but and they did a lot of that without Mitch Haniger, who was on the COVID IL. So, I don't know yet. I'm holding back my judgment on really what I think this team's going to be, because I just don't know yet. And I think the sample size is still pretty small, but these are all encouraging signs. Really encouraging. Ty France, JP Crawford. I think Jesse Winker, who has been really unlucky early in the year, looks like he's starting to come out of it. So I don't have a whole lot of concerns on the pitching side. For me, it was always about the offense. And I think that will still be the storyline as we move deeper into the season.
Yeah, it was really nice to see Jesse get one from the BABIP gods on Sunday with the little walk-off loop single, because he's been on the unfortunate end of so much luck so far this season. But would that be something that would really help to get somebody in that 3 spot really firing? Because his stats almost look absurd when you see him up on the big screen between the on base percentage and his ability to take those walks, but then his slugging percentage being so low. I don't know if I've ever seen something quite like that. Do you think this is just a slow start for him? He's got so much experience as a hitter and he'll just get past it eventually.
I do, Lydia. I think, the track record for him is pretty good. I mean, this is a guy that's produced in the big leagues. I looked up his numbers last year with the Reds, and he hit 360 in the month of April last year. So This is a very uncharacteristic start for him. But as you mentioned, he's still taking his walks. He's getting on base and is being a table setter. But I think we're going to see him start to drive in more runs because he's done it before, and certainly because of where he hits in that lineup. And it looks like those 2 guys above him, Adam Frazier and certainly Ty France, are getting on base a lot.
Yeah, let's talk about those 2 guys. Thank you to the San Diego Padres, I guess we should say, because trades lately with that team have been working out. But Ty France named AL Player of the Week this week, which is pretty awesome. And he definitely earned it, right? What did you see from Ty so far? Well, in this homestand in particular, what did you see from him?
I'll tell you what I didn't see, Lydia. I didn't see him make many outs.
Yeah.
I mean, incredible. And I even go back to the game, if you remember early in that series against the Astros when Justin Verlander pitched, and I think they may have only had 3 hits in that game, and he had 2 of them. And one was on this nasty breaking ball that was low and outside, And somehow Ty got his bat on it and got enough on it and just didn't try and do too much with it, because this is a guy who I think really knows his swing, really has good plate coverage. And all he did was just kind of poke it in the right field. This is a pitch that you really can't do a whole lot with. And I just saw him, a guy that's extremely confident and a guy that's just really difficult to pitch to, because I think, if you want to run the ball inside on him, you run the risk of hitting him. And I think obviously he kind of gets out over the plate a little bit. All those hit by pitches aren't by accident. But he's still quick enough where he could turn on the ball inside, but is also willing to flip that ball in the right field. So he looks like a complete hitter to me. I just don't see a whole lot of holes. Every once in a while he'll get beat, but all the good ones do. But I think we're really starting to see something. I dug up a fun stat the other day. What was it? Oh, since the trade, 721 at bats since that trade, which is a huge sample size, right? And he's hitting exactly 300 with the Mariners since that trade. So, we could pick apart this Padres deal all we want, but it clearly looks like the Mariners got the better end of that.
Another part of that deal was Andrés Muñoz, who's been so much fun to watch in the bullpen so far this year. You have a great article about him up at The Athletic. What have you learned about him? And I mean, watching 103 fire in there is really fun, but sort of seeing a lot more of his slider lately too. What have you learned about him as a reliever?
When he was with the Padres before Tommy John surgery, so in 2019 when he came up, still a very young pitcher at that point, he was pure fastball, and he'd mix in a few sliders. Well, he's really post Tommy John surgery. And this isn't anything. He told me this isn't anything the Mariners have pushed onto him, but he's just felt a lot more comfortable with his slider. So he's flipped that usage quite a bit. And he still has that, that 100-mile-an-hour fastball in his back pocket. But the slider's been a really devastating pitch because, coming out of the hand and the arm speed and all that, this all looks like a fastball. But at the very end, it's got that sharp break away from a right-handed hitter, and it's been really hard to square up. So, he gave up that home run to Byron Buxton on, I think, the second game of the season, but it looks like everybody's giving up home runs to Buxton so far this year. I think he's got 6 of them. So, but since then he hasn't been scored on. So they're going to have to be careful with how they use him coming back from missing basically an entire year. So I don't think you're not going to see him pitching back-to-back games for a while, and it may be 1 out of every 3 days, but eventually I think he'll get to a point where, I mean, I know they trust him right now, but maybe there's an opportunity for him to pitch on consecutive days at some point, and that's really going to be a key for them.
One of the things I've always been impressed by in the Jerry Dipoto era is I feel like he has been pretty good at assembling a bullpen. It's one of the things that seems to be the most difficult in baseball, at least, if you watch other teams and you see their struggles and what they're willing to give up at the trade deadline because they're desperate to add depth there. Is that a fair assessment? Do you feel like Jerry Dipoto and company have been pretty good over the years at finding bullpen pieces and assembling a pretty effective bullpen?
Yeah, and these guys have kind of come from all over the place. I mean, when they made that trade for the Padres in August of 2020, Munoz had already had Tommy John surgery, and you knew he wasn't going to pitch. So really, it was kind of easy I wouldn't say it's easy for the Padres to include him in that deal, but they weren't going to see him for a while. And then and then you have Drew Steckenrider and Paul Sewald, who are non-roster invitees to camp in 2021 with no guarantee of anything. And, look what those two guys did last year. I mean, Paul Sewald came up on the same day as Jared Kelenic and Logan Gilbert. And you could argue that he was more value than either one of them last year, even though Gilbert was very good at times, and will be amazing, I think. But yeah, it's funny. And then I see these deals, Lydia, in the off season with these teams spending so much money on their bullpen. I'm like, well, the Mariners, they got all these guys, and none of these guys are making a whole lot of money. Now, they did lose Casey Sadler in spring training, who I think it was one of their best relievers and maybe didn't get all the recognition he deserves. But, I wouldn't say their bullpen's deep anymore, but, the guy, if they can keep these guys healthy, if they can get Paul Sewald back in there, I think it's going to be a really good mix moving forward.
So you mentioned Logan Gilbert because we have to talk about him, and he's off to a pretty incredible start this year. And that means a lot when we're talking about the vision Jerry Dipoto had. And they really built around this idea of a lot of young arms coming up through the system at the same time, and that being a huge part of opening their championship window and keeping it open for the next couple of years. Like, what have you seen so far from Logan Gilbert, and does that give you a good feeling, good optimism about the other young arms they have coming up through the system? Whether that's, well, we've seen Matt Brash so far, and even though that's not like a totally homegrown talent, it's been pretty, the yields on that have been pretty great. But names like Emerson Hancock and George Kirby, that's kind of a two-part question for you. Sorry, Corey, but Logan Gilbert to begin with, how great has he been?
Oh, it's been a lot of fun to watch. And I even go back to last year, Lydia. Do you remember the game he pitched? I think it was a Sunday afternoon game against the Yankees at home. And I think maybe it was one hit over 7 scoreless innings. And it was just enough to where you could sort of dream on him, and, he, like any of these young guys, and we continue to see it this year, you got to sort of weather the good and the bad, because this is the first time these guys are doing it on the game's biggest stage. But I just think Logan Gilbert's wired a little differently. I think he's really, sort of, growth oriented. He understands the analytical side of things. He's willing to try new things. I think he ditched his grip on a bunch of pitches in spring training and found something else that worked for him. So he's amenable to change. And I just think the sky's the limit with this guy. And, what is he, like 6'6"? And I don't know what this feels like, and I don't want to know, but, standing in the box against him when he's pitching and his stride, you know what I mean? Like, it probably feels like he's 3 feet away from you, and which doesn't seem really fair. But yeah, he is a lot of fun to watch. And it's starting to be like almost every day now is like, when Robbie Ray pitches, I really want to watch Robbie Ray pitch. When Matt Brash pitches, I really want to watch that. But I don't miss any Logan Gilbert starts because they could be pretty electric.
Yeah, absolutely. I watched Rob Friedman, Pitching Ninja, had a great interview with Matt Brash recently, and they talked about the pitching staff. Matt was complimenting both Robbie and Logan because of their mentality, how aggressive they like to be with hitters, how they'll just go after guys in the zone because they know their stuff is that good. And they just have this utter confidence about that. I love hearing that about Logan Gilbert, because I think on the outside, he seems so nice and sweet, but that the fact that he has that competitive spirit, like, I'm going to beat whoever it is, I think that's great. And it's a great example for people like Matt Brash, who now in that interview, he said, I want to face the Yankees in Yankee Stadium. I want to face all the best teams like on their home turf, and is excited about doing that. Speaking of Brash though, like, how great has he been? For a lot of Mariners fans, I don't think he was really on their radar. And then hearing that he would be the 5th starter, watching that slider in action, what's been the best return on Matt Brash so far?
Well, I mean, I think it's really his, limitless upside, really. This is a young guy. I don't think he turns 24 until May. I just think there's his best days are ahead of him. And I think we could look at his dynamic pitch mix, the fastball he runs up in the upper 90s, the curveball, and then that wipeout slider. But again, I think what we've seen with him is command issues can be a little bit of a bugaboo with him. And they had been in the minors. So, these teams at the big league level, again, these hitters are really good. And these teams have a lot of resources at their fingertips to figure out how to combat that. So I think what you saw in his last start was teams are unwilling to chase those pitches out of the strike zone, because if he can't show his ability to consistently get in the strike zone with those pitches, then why would they chase those? So, it's sort of incumbent upon him, certainly, and the Mariners pitching group to kind of iron some things out. I can't sit here and say that there's not some concern, but, I also seem to think that, this is a pretty bright guy and it's a really bright pitching group. And, I think that maybe they could iron out some of this command stuff because, again, the pitch mix is just so devastating. But again, it doesn't matter where you're pitching, as you know, Lydia, like you got to be able to throw strikes.
Yeah, that is important. And he mentioned that in the interview with Pitching Ninja. He talked about how Mariners staff's been great to him, and that they said, hey, you don't need to spot these pitches all of the time. You just need to get it in the general vicinity of the strike zone. That's all we're looking for. And so that fact really did help him. What do you make of his delivery? Because that was some of the complaints on some scouting reports coming up, that it's a little bit like a reliever delivery, and that they didn't really see it being repeatable for a starter. What do you make of that part of his mechanics?
That's funny, because I kind of thought the same a little bit, and not necessarily looking at his delivery, but I thought with this pitch mix that maybe this guy's future, and this was in spring training, like maybe his future's in the bullpen. Maybe he's a dynamic 2-pitch guy who could come in and get outs in the 9th inning, which I think he could do. But, you always want to exhaust these guys and get as long as look as you can at them as starters before you determine they're going to be relievers. I mean, we're not far removed from an era. You're far too young to know this, Lydia, but where relievers were once basically considered failed starters, and that was, that was just kind of the knock on them. Maybe they didn't have a 3rd pitch or a 4th pitch, so you went to the bullpen. But that was back in the day where the game was dominated by starting pitching. Now with the specialization of the bullpen and all that, things have changed. But he will determine what his path is, but I seem to think that he's a starter now. He's going to be a starter moving forward. And again, he doesn't have to iron out all the command issues, but if he can clean up some of that stuff and get in the strike zone a little bit more, I think it's all going to work pretty well.
Yeah. And I think too, these days you can almost be a starting pitcher if you have 2 dominant pitches. Like Robbie Ray is almost an example of that, a guy that really relies on basically 2 pitches a lot of the time to get people out. They have to be 2 great pitches, clearly. Yeah. But yeah, that's interesting you mentioned that, because Brash mentioned Robbie Ray as a guy that he's gone to for advice, and a guy that he wants to be like and emulate. Another player I have to ask you about is JP Crawford, because he has been so much fun to watch in his entirety here, but especially lately, because it just seems like he's having so much fun. And I always look for that. I just want to see guys having fun playing baseball, because that's what it's supposed to be. He looks like a guy that is just on a sandlot every time he's on the baseball diamond and having a ton of fun. Like, what have you seen from JP Crawford early this year? And is he also sort of moving into like the captain role of the team? Because it kind of seems like that's happening.
Yeah, I could see that. And, we saw a lot of these signs last year with JP. He had a big year, whereas, I felt like his offense finally caught up to his defense. And we certainly know how good of a defender he is. But the question had always been about his bat. But he answered some of that last year. And then I think one of the things he's really benefited from was a strength and conditioning program put together by James Clifford, the former Husky great linebacker, who is the strength and conditioning guy for the Mariners. I think JP felt like toward the end of the year, and that's a long year, right? It's a 6-month season with 6 weeks of spring training or whatever, that maybe he was losing some strength. So I think what we saw last year was JP was a lot stronger start to finish. I think his body's starting to look a little different. It still looks like, to me, maybe you agree, Lydia, that this guy never eats any meals. He's so skinny, but I think the strength is there. The way he's hit the ball this year, he's got a couple home runs. He didn't get a second home run last year until the 52nd game of the year. I think there's some power in there. And when he squared up a few balls this year, it just sounds a little different. And I know that sounds kind of corny, but, when you're at the ballpark and, we're sitting in the press box, you could hear that contact. And he's running into some pitches this year, and he's really driven the ball a lot more than he has in the past. So again, I see a guy that's extremely content. He's very happy here. They gave him that new contract on opening day, and I think he generally really appreciates what the Mariners saw in him, and certainly appreciates how Jerry Dipoto told him this offseason that, hey, you're our shortstop. We're not pursuing any of these other guys. So I think he's kind of emboldened by, the opportunity he's received in Seattle, and also, 27, 28 years old, like, is his body and his game and everything's kind of all coming together at once. So when I talk about guys where the sky is the limit, Logan Gilbert, Julio Rodriguez, I think JP Crawford's in that group as well.
Yeah, there were some great quotes from him about how coming to Seattle sort of gave him new life, and how he's always going to be grateful and appreciative of that opportunity because it meant so much to him at that point in his career. I also just, again, his emotional strength, that sounds cheesy to say, but whether it's comments, whether it's the way that he always seems to be talking up his teammates, or to be the leader of any sort of dance party or train that's happening in the dugout, I think it has just been really fun to watch that development, because after Kyle Seager left, there's definitely a big hole in the leadership department on this team. Scott Service had some comments in spring training about how, well, it's not just one guy that's going to fill that role. It's going to be multiple guys. He mentioned Mitch and he mentioned JP in that conversation. But is there any other names that you've seen that, whether it's Marco, whoever, that have sort of stepped up in the leadership role and you would view in that role?
Yeah, I would say Marco, and I would even say Robbie Ray for a guy that's been here for just a few months. And when we talk about leadership, I mean, that manifests itself in all sorts of different ways. This isn't, a guy standing up on the pool table in the middle of the clubhouse and beating his chest and demanding everybody listens to him. All these guys sort of go about things differently. Some lead by example, some lead with their words. And I think that's the nice thing about this diverse clubhouse is you see a lot of different guys leading in a lot of different ways. And I think there's somebody in there that appeals to everyone, whether that be the starting pitchers gravitating toward Marco or Robbie Ray, who I think has felt sort of incumbent upon himself to share a lot of his experiences with guys like Logan Gilbert and Matt Brash and Chris Flex and guys who haven't necessarily been around a lot. So yeah, it's a good group, and leadership is certainly important. You want these guys to sort of govern themselves more so than having the manager come down with a heavy hand. These guys are adults, and they understand the game and they understand what they need to do to get ready. But I think anytime you could get that message delivered to you by one of your peers, I think it carries more weight. I'll use the analogy as a father of an 8-year-old twin boys, Lydia, that, we could talk till I'm blue in the face about, some things, but if that message maybe comes from the teacher, it may resonate a little differently. So hopefully they listen to the teacher. Hopefully they listen to me sometimes, but I don't know.
I bet they're angels. Corey. I've seen pictures.
That's a strong word. They are handsome, but yeah. They could be angels, mostly when they're sleeping, though. So
that's fair. I'm not a parent, but I would imagine that one day I'll be very grateful for the hours my kids are asleep. It's okay. Yeah. We've made it this far without talking about either Jared Kelnick or Julio Rodriguez, which seems kind of amazing to me. But the numbers, if you just look on paper, wouldn't jump out at you unless it's maybe strikeout percentage. But what about these two guys do you still have faith in, or are you actually starting to have legitimate concerns?
I don't think I'm necessarily really concerned anymore. I think these guys will be fine. But I also think that for them to get where they want to go, these guys both have to pick things up a little bit and are going to have to contribute more moving forward. And again, we have such a small sample size we're talking about here. And, they both had some moments so far. There's been times where they've looked a little overmatched, and honestly, sometimes where they've looked unlucky, especially with some of these called third strikes. So you'd like to think that maybe the results would normalize over a bigger sample size, but I still look at both these guys, Lydia, and maybe you feel the same way. I just think there's just so much talent there that I find it really hard to believe that these guys won't be major contributors to this team. Does that mean they're going to be all-stars this year? No, probably not. But we're talking about a 21-year-old and a 22-year-old still trying to And even in Jared Kelnick's case, with a bigger sample size, still trying to find his way. Again, the game is really hard, and it'll humble everyone, and it has humbled everyone. Look at what Jesse Winker's going through. I mean, you're an all-star. You've produced in the big leagues, and then you come out in the month of April and you can't buy a hit. So yeah, I think those guys will be fine moving forward, but it's a tough time for them right now because, they want to contribute, they want to help. But the one thing I'm encouraged by, well, probably more than one thing, is that these guys seem to be sticking with their plans, right? They don't seem to be chasing results, and which could be really easy to do when you're struggling. Maybe the notion of wanting to change something, or maybe expanding the strike zone to try and hit these pitches that are being called strikes, even though they're balls. But I thought that walk that Julio took the other day with the bases loaded, even though he had to stop and look back just to make sure that it was a walk. I thought that was a huge moment. That was a huge moment in that game, and I think it was a big moment for him.
Yeah, I think he said that it was just absolutely electric at the ballpark, that might have been his favorite at bat so far, just because of the energy in the stadium, which is also another factor that's really cool to see, that baseball is alive and well in the city of Seattle, and it's making a difference in the environment. But both those guys too, that we have been talking about, Jared and Julio, I think they've had success at nearly every level that they've played at. And it's kind of a crazy thing when you have never struggled before. I think player development guys will tell you that that's part of what they look for in the minors when guys are coming up, is they want them to struggle because they want to see how they rebound, and they want to help them develop resiliency before they get to that major league level. And Jared and Julio really didn't experience too many of those struggles when they were coming up through the minors. So I think it's like now is the first time as very young men that they're sort of experiencing, hey, I'm not immediately great at this. And that must be such a crazy feeling for guys that have always been in the 1% of whatever they're doing. So yeah, I'm with you on, there's just so much talent there. And part of it is learning the tough lesson of, all right, how do I just get up every day and keep going? And so far, Julio definitely seems like he has the positive attitude. And I think Jared does too, but sometimes he gets like a little hard on himself. Do you think that's fair? Like he seems that he is just, occasionally he's not having fun. I want him to have more fun.
I think he's having fun. I just think he's so intense. And I think, I do think that some of this wears on him a little bit, but going back to your point previously, I really think, and if you talk to him, and then also if you look at the results from last September, that struggle he went through that first go around in the big leagues was very humbling, right? He went back to AAA, and but I think when he came back, I think he was a better player. I think that showed through in the numbers, but I think he was also a little bit more confident and more comfortable. And, while he probably wouldn't wish those struggles on anybody, I think it benefited him because I think it was important for him to go through that in order for him to improve. I mean, what is that saying? If you're going through hell, keep going, just keep going. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that's kind of what he went through last year. And I think he will tell you, if you ask him, hey, are you better off for having gone through that? And he would probably say, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it can only help you as a ball player. Speaking of the outfield, one name too that a lot of people are wondering about is Kyle Lewis. Is there any, we've been sort of benefited by a lot of at least exciting young talent or amazing players when it comes to Mitch Haniger and Jesse Winker in the outfield. So it's almost like a collection of riches out there, but there is still Kyle Lewis, and getting him back. What's the latest on his rehab and when Mariners fans could expect him back?
Yeah, and we haven't really gotten an update on him for a while, especially with Scott Service being out, and he's kind of our conduit in terms of getting that information. So my understanding is he's still in Arizona, still going through the paces of extended spring training. And before we ever see him again, he's going to have to go out to a minor league affiliate and probably get a lot of at-bats. So I wouldn't suspect that anything's happening with him on the horizon. and he's going to need to produce. I mean, we talk about he was rookie of the year in the 2020 season, which was short in the 60 games. He has not played the equivalent of a full year in the major leagues yet. And so while we've seen some very good things, and this is not a knock on him, it's just, we still don't know who he is as a player or what he is or what he's going to become. We've seen flashes of it. We've seen the power, and, remember he robbed that catch there on that smoky day in September of 2020. And he does a lot of good things well, but again, this is it's a do good game, and you got to be healthy, and you got to be able to get out there on the field and produce. And at this point, there's not really a spot for him. That doesn't mean there won't be. I mean, let's face it, this lineup could look completely different by the end of the season. I shouldn't say completely different, but who knows? Maybe they had a bat, maybe they had an arm, maybe Kyle Lewis comes back. So what he needs now is good health. And when he's ready to go out to an affiliate, he's going to have to get some games under his belt, and then they'll hopefully, he makes it tough for them, makes it a tough decision for them. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
If he's knocking on the door, if he's hitting 340 in AAA or something, it shows that he's ready. And at that point, they'll have to bring him up.
Well, one thing we know for sure, the Mariners aren't going to rush it, and that's good, because you never want to feel like you're shortening your rehab stint. So everybody back home rooting for Kyle Lewis, absolutely, because we want to see it back on the field. Right now, Corey, as we record this, the Mariners are in first place in the AL West, which I'm not sure that we would have predicted that at this point, but what do they need to do to keep that going? Like, let's just say a checklist for the next month, for the month of May. What do you want to see from them to end up in first place at the end of that month?
Maybe Ty France will hit like 600, on this road trip. I think, again, it's, they're going to face some tougher teams, beginning with the Rays, and tougher teams moving forward. But I think they're always going to pitch enough. I think their pitching is always going to be good enough, starting and in relief, to where these games will always be close. I mean, they play a ton of close games, right? I think the ultimate determining factor for them is going to continue to be the offense. Are they going to hit enough? Are they going to take enough walks to kind of keep that conga line moving, right? And I think when they're going good, that's what we've seen so far, and it's a lot of fun. And I remember sitting there the other night watching all these, they score 8 runs in the 1 inning and 13 for the game against the Royals. I'm like, I don't remember seeing anything like this. It's unique, but is it sustainable? Or we're about to find out. But I've seen enough good things to think that maybe it might be.
Why not? We'll be on the Dare to Dream Express, as my old co-worker Dave Grosby would call it. So all aboard on that. I'm totally for that.
Yeah.
I have to ask you the really important journalistic question before we get out of here, Corey, and that is, how do you feel about Louiegate 2022? Like, where are you on Louie Louie being played after the 7th inning, during the 7th inning stretch?
Yeah, I thought about this a little bit, and I am generally sort of anti. I'm sort of anti that. Oh, we should just keep doing something because we've always done something. I don't think that's ever a good excuse for anything. No. In fact, I think it's not good in a lot of circumstances. So I applaud the Mariners for doing something different. The fans seem to be kind of into it, and I think it kind of blows over a little bit. I like Louie Louie, but again, it's a new year. This team's trending upward, trying to get some young people to the ballpark, which is always baseball's biggest problem. One of them, I should say. But no, I like it. And I don't pretend to know what any of this music is. I just want to listen to 80s rock all the time, but they never play any of that. So for me, this is good enough. People seem to be kind of energized by it. How about you? Where do you stand on that?
Well, see, I'm with you on the tradition thing. I think tradition is a terrible argument to continue to do something. Yeah. I will say this one did mystify me a little bit, only because I read the article and had a lot of great quotes from Kevin Martinez at Seattle Times and talked about sort of the process they went through in the offseason to do this. But I am a little mystified about how they landed on this specific choice. I will say, I think a lot of things in Seattle lately involve Macklemore. And at some point, I think we should also diversify, showcase the other great musical talent that we have in this city. And that would be a good thing too, because I mean, there has been other musical talent to come out of the city in the last 10 years, but I'm with you too on the people, I think ultimately should decide, and change is always hard at first. I'm sure that people get used to it after a while. I think it would be cool if it was like a fan voted on thing. Maybe it was, maybe like the city of Seattle should decide in some kind of vote, or that way the 80s rock could like at least make it in there as an option.
Oh, I would just be like stuffing the ballot box, Lydia, just like clicking over and over again.
What would be like a great anthem that fits that genre that you would just get, it would make you so happy to hear?
Oh geez, where do I start? Alice in Chains, Nirvana, Soundgarden, Queensryche, all these bands I grew up listening to in the 80s. I would take any of them in a heartbeat. A couple years ago, I think it was 2018, Jerry Cantrell was down at the ballpark with Alice in Chains. I mean, it's Jerry, and I think their drummer is original, and then they got a couple new guys, obviously. But I talked to Kevin Martinez. I'm like, hey, Kevin, can I go down and just like shake his hand and say hi? And I did like totally nerded out, right? Like, I don't know when I'm going to get this chance again. So yeah, boy, if they want 80s rock, they could hire me as a consultant. I'd do it for free at this point.
Yeah, let's go just to hear that at the ballpark. Well, I'm all about it. I'll be advocating for it if they ever get a vote. I'll help you stuff the ballot box. So
thank you. I'm gonna need some help.
Corey, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. And I just want to remind everybody where they can read your stuff, of course, at The Athletic, but they can also follow you on Twitter, which they should do because you're hilarious. What is your Twitter handle so everybody knows?
I knew you were going to ask me. I think it's at Corey Brock MLB. Should probably know that.
That's how humble you are. You're like, yeah, I don't even give this out very much.
No, I'm just old and I can't remember anything. But let's stick with your answer. That's better.
Brock, for generously taking the time to chat with us today here at True North. Look forward to catching up with him throughout the season. And remember, you can read all of his incredible work at The Athletic. Follow him on Twitter, even if he doesn't know his own Twitter handle. We'll work on that by the end of the year. All right, we'll talk to you next time. Thanks so much for checking out this video and checking out True North. You guys are the best. Let's keep the electric factory going. Go Mariners.